Hello, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be reading you a true crime story called The Submarine Case from the book True Crime Case Histories Book, Volumes 4 to 6. If I pronounce any names wrong, I do apologize. For more than 100 years, Refshaleon, a large industrial area in the port of Copenhagen, Denmark, was home to Burmeister and Wain, one of the world's leading diesel engine producers for large ships. The company thrived for 150 years, employing over 8,000 people until the global competitiveness of the shipping industry in the 1970s eventually caused the company to collapse. Over the 100 acres of dilapidated shipyard sat abandoned for the next decade or so. By the late 90s, the warehouses, with their rusted metal landscapes and cheap rents, became home to local aspiring artists and entrepreneurs. The artificial island was only a quick 10-minute bike ride from the city center of Copenhagen. By the late 2010s, the area had grown into a vibrant, thriving hipster bastion. Over time, the starving artists were eventually pushed out by flourishing tech firms, craft breweries, and food vendors. Today, the area features many popular restaurants, including Alchemist, consistently rated one of the best restaurants in the world. It features a 15 million decor and seats only 40 guests for a 5-hour meal at $700 a plate. The area is also home to the annual Copenhagen Heavy Metal Festival, featuring some of the largest names in heavy metal such as Ozzy Osbourne, Tool, Kiss, and Iron Maiden. One of the better-known entrepreneurs that had occupied the area was Peter Madsen, a Danish inventor, artist, and entrepreneur known to many as Rocket Madsen. He was an eccentric, self-taught aerospace engineer who had built 3 submarines, several rockets, delivered a popular TED Talk, and was working on a personal rocket designed for human travel in 2017 that he described as an intercontinental ballistic missile passenger ship. He was known as a charismatic dreamer, thought of as an aspiring, small-scale Elon Musk or Richard Branson. Kim Wall was an independent journalist living in Copenhagen and thought Peter Madsen would be an excellent subject for one of her long-form articles. Kim was exceedingly intelligent and eternally curious. To hear her friends describe the petite redhead as a badass was a gross understatement. The ambitious 30-year-old had written many articles that had taken her all over the world. Born and raised in Sweden, Kim spent most of her adult life scouring the globe. She earned her bachelor's degree in international relations at the London School of Economics, then moved on to graduate with honors from Columbia University in New York with 2 master's degrees in journalism and international relations. Kim's writings were certainly not fluff pieces. She wrote articles on foreign policy, social justice, climate change, nuclear weapons testing, gender, and popular culture. Her stories took her all over the world to places like Sri Lanka, North Korea, India, Australia, Haiti, Cuba, and Uganda. She believed that the best stories were not told from inside a newsroom. She needed to be in on the action. Her extensive client list included the New York Times, Harper's, BBC, The Guardian, Time, The Atlantic, Vice Magazine, Slate, The South China Post, and many others. On the evening of August 10th, 2017, Kim and her boyfriend, Ole Stobe, were preparing to host their going-away party. In 6 days, they were planning to move from their home in Copenhagen to Beijing, China. At 5 p.m. that evening, Kim received a text message from Peter Madsen inviting her to his nearby workshop for tea. She had been trying to get an interview with him for several weeks. If she wanted to get the interview before she left for Beijing, this was her last chance. She agreed and left for his nearby hangar warehouse. Just 30 minutes later, Kim came back home. She grabbed a few things and told Ole she was going for a 2-hour ride with Madsen on his Nautilus submarine and would have to miss the first few hours of their going away party. The UC3 Nautilus was a 58-foot midget submarine that Madsen had designed and built himself. Madsen told Kim that they could take a quick trip around the bay surrounding Copenhagen, and she could interview him during their trip. She could even make it back for the last few hours of their party. That Thursday evening, Kim left for the pier not far from their apartment, where Madsen's submarine was docked. Just before 7 p.m., she texted Ole a photo of the Nautilus with the message, "I'm still alive, by the way." As they cruised through the bay with the tower still above the water, she sent him another photo of nearby windmills. Moments later, as Ole was entertaining their guests at the waterside barbecue, he and their friends saw Kim waving from the tower of the submarine. Kim sent a final text to Ole, "Going down now, I love you." That was the last time they would see Kim alive. For several weeks in 2017, an Australian filmmaker, Emma Sullivan, had been filming a documentary about Madsen and his group of engineers for Sky News. That evening, neither Sullivan nor Madsen's assistants had known anything about his meeting with Kim Wall. This seemed strange at the time, considering the close proximity they have all been in during the filming. However, in hindsight, it became clear that Madsen had purposely hidden the existence of Kim because he knew what was to come. Kim should have returned by 10 p.m. that night, but there was no word from her and no sign of the submarine at the pier. The goodbye party had moved from the waterfront to a nearby bar, but when Ole returned home late that night and Kim was still not back, he was worried sick. Ole rode his bike around the island searching for her in the dark, but found nothing. Frustrated and frightened, Ole called police just before 2 a.m. to report his girlfriend missing. By dawn, the Danish Navy had issued a full-scale maritime search using 2 helicopters, 3 ships, and several private boats. There had been no distress calls issued the prior night. Finally, several hours later, the Nautilus submarine was spotted floating in the bay south of Copenhagen. Witnesses on nearby rescue boats saw Madsen in the submarine's tower wearing his trademark military fatigues. He then disappeared inside the tower for a moment, and loud whoosh of air was heard coming from the sub. Seconds later, the submarine quickly started to sink and Madsen climbed out. It only took about 30 seconds for the sub to sink as he swam towards the nearby boats. Madsen was rescued unharmed from the sinking vessel, but the question remained, where was Kim? Rescue boats brought him back to Copenhagen and dropped him at the dock. Television crews filmed him giving a thumbs up as he stepped off the boat. Madsen told the waiting cameras, quote, "I couldn't close any hatches or anything, but I guess that was pretty good because otherwise I still would have been down there," unquote. There was no mention of Kim. Police detained Madsen for questioning, but when he was asked of Kim's whereabouts, he looked confused. According to Madsen, he had dropped Kim off at the same pier that he had picked her up from. He said the two of them went on a quick cruise of the bay before he dropped her off, as planned, and decided to go back out in the submarine by himself. The police didn't believe Madsen's overly vague story and suspected that he had intentionally sunk the submarine in an attempt to destroy evidence. He was arrested for preliminary involuntary manslaughter. Quote, "For having killed in an unknown way and in an unknown place Kim Isabel Fredrika Wall of Sweden sometime after Thursday 5 p.m. That Saturday, Madsen was brought into a closed-door court session. When asked again about Kim, he changed his story. Madsen admitted that he lied when he said he had dropped her off at the pier. He then claimed that he was holding the submarine hatch open for her when he lost his footing and his hand slipped. The hatch fell on her head, crushing her skull and killing her instantly. He told authorities that he had panicked, pulled her body out of the hatch, and buried her at the sea. If Madsen's story was true, police would know soon enough. Kim's body was bound to wash up ashore sooner or later, so police continued their search at the bay. On August 21st, 11 days after Kim went missing, a cyclist riding along the shoreline of Amager Island noticed something that had washed up on the shore. Upon closer inspection, the cyclist could tell it was part of a human body. It was a torso, missing the arms, legs, and head. Using DNA from Kim's hairbrush and toothbrush, the torso was positively identified as that of Kim Wall. She had been stabbed 15 times, 14 of which were in and around her genitals. It was obvious that Kim's death was no accident. Prosecutors changed their charge against Madsen from involuntary manslaughter to murder and improper handling of a corpse. Divers searched the area where the torso had been found and where the submarine had gone down. Over the course of the next month, Kim's head was located, as were both of her legs. All three were in bags with large pieces of metal to help weigh them down. They also found her orange fleece sweater, shoes, socks, and blanket, and black and white skirt, along with a knife. All were packed inside another plastic bag with a large piece of lead. Medical examiners found no fractures or wounds on Kim's skull, ruling out the possibility of her being struck in the head by the submarine hatch. It was determined that the likely cause of death was strangulation. Despite the discovery of the dismembered body and no damage to her skull, Peter Madsen still insisted Kim had died from an accidental hit on the head. He had no explanation for the dismemberment or stab wounds. Madsen sat in jail while detectives learned more about him and his strange proclivities. Although he was seemingly happily married, Madsen enjoyed his sexual freedom and was known for experimenting his various fetish groups. When forensic detectives searched Madsen's computer and iPhone, they found over 140 video clips, many of which were snuff films. Madsen had a morbid fascination of videos featuring simulated, animated, and actual death. The videos depicted women being beaten, strangled, and tortured. There were also videos of decapitation. His browser search history showed that he had searched the internet for beheadings just before the ride in the submarine. Madsen denied that any of the videos on the computer were his. He told investigators that the computers were often used by his office staff and an intern. He claimed that the videos could easily have belonged to any one of them. When detectives interviewed Emma Sullivan, who had been filming the documentary about Madsen, she told them that in an interview just days prior to Kim's death, Madsen mentioned that he was worried that he might be a psychopath. He also spoke to her about his fixation of having sex on a submarine. As the prosecution built their case against him, Madsen changed his story yet again. This time he claimed that Kim had died of accidental carbon monoxide poisoning while she was inside the sub and he was up on the deck. This new explanation was his excuse for why there was no damage to her skull. His theory was later shut down by the Danish Navy after their examination of the submarine showed no traces of carbon monoxide or CO2. Madsen also admitted to dismembering her and dumping her body parts in the sea. The charge against him were changed once again to murder, indecent handling of a corpse, and sexual assault without intercourse. At trial the next January, Madsen entered a plea of not guilty. The prosecution allowed a casual text that he wrote to his wife just moments after he killed Kim Wall. Quote, "I am on a little adventure with Nautilus, sailing at sea by the moon. I am not diving. Kisses and hugs to the kittens." Unquote. The prosecutor queried Madsen on how he had the composure to send such a casual text after such a traumatic event on the submarine. Madsen replied, quote, "I know that my wife would worry. I couldn't think of much else than that there was a catastrophe on the submarine." Unquote. When asked why he decided to dismember and dump Kim's body, if it was all just a tragic accident, Madsen said that he suffered a temporary psychosis. He claimed that he dismembered her too. Quote, save her family, if something so horrible that I do not want to go into detail, unquote. The prosecution pushed him to elaborate, and Madsen told the court that it was an unbelievably insane situation, which made him think of the movie Seven, when Brad Pitt found his wife's dismembered head in a box at the end. Eventually, Madsen went into detail about the killing and how he needed to put Kim's legs into the toilet to stabilize her body as he sawed off her head. Madsen claimed, quote, it was very unpleasant and not planned, unquote. He continued explaining that he used a 19th-inch sharpened screwdriver to puncture her body. Quote, yes, I put some punctures in the body parts because I didn't want them to be inflated by gases. There's nothing sexual in the fact that the stab wounds were in and near her genitals. I understand why you might want to think there was, but there was nothing sexual in it for me, unquote. Even the defense witness couldn't deny his obsession with snuff films, murder, and where to hide body parts. A former mistress explained that he belonged to various sexual fetish clubs and had confided to her his ideal murder fantasy. This involved filming the murder of a woman while he and his friends dismembered the body together. She also recalled that he was kicked out of a BDSM club for being overly creepy. Quote, not because he was too extreme, but because he was too passive. He seemed fascinated, but not turned on. One witness told the court about a video that Madsen once showed her of a woman being strangled with a wire. Yet another witness testified that he had said Koji Bay would be, quote, a good place to dump a body because it was a busy shipping area and it would be difficult to use sonar. The jury also heard testimony from psychiatrists that had questioned Madsen during his incarceration. During his sessions, he spoke of the dismemberment of Kim's body with no emotion. What do you do when you have a big problem? You divide it into something smaller. A dead body does not deserve any special respect. The psychiatrist agreed that Madsen had narcissistic and psychopathic traits, adding that he had a severe lack of empathy and remorse, and described him as extremely untrustworthy and a pathological liar. Another witness testified that Madsen had repeatedly invited her onto the sub just 2 days before killing Kim. The prosecution used this information to help establish premeditation. They argued that Madsen had been actively trying to lure women to the submarine. The prosecution also argued that Madsen showed premeditation when he brought along tools such as a 19-inch sharpened screwdriver and saws, tools that typically aren't needed on a submarine. When the prosecution asked Madsen of his childhood, one of his answers was particularly bizarre. I wanted to be a victim in a child porn film. On March 8, 2018, Peter Madsen was found guilty of murders, indecent handling of a corpse, and sexual assault. He was sentenced to life in prison. While in prison on December 19, 2019, Madsen married Jenny Kirpin, an eccentric Russian artist living in exile in Finland. Initially, Kirpin announced the marriage was part of an art project called This Is Not the Peter We Knew. She later claimed the marriage was genuine. Emma Sullivan's documentary about Madsen, Into the Deep, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was originally slated for an April 2020 release on Netflix, but the deal with Netflix has since been withdrawn. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking to my channel, and I will see you on the next one.